Welcome to the JRPG Canon, the podcast where we discuss how fun and awesome JRPGs are by dissecting their opening slice. I am Sam Allman.
I am special guest, David Bernard Houck.
That's right. This is my project, my baby. I have tried to do this. This is the third time now. First one was YouTube videos, but it's awkward talking to yourself into a microphone, so I made it into a blog, but no one reads blogs anymore. So now I'm doing it as an interview podcast because talking to yourself in a microphone is very awkward. So
yeah,
I will have...
who would do a podcast about RPGs where they only talk to themselves about it? Who would do that?
No clue. Don't know anybody on this current podcast that would ever do that. But yeah, if you have not seen the YouTube video and you have not read the blog, a quick rundown on the idea and vibe of this podcast going forward. These are going to be very short episodes. They are going to take just from like the start of the game through the rough estimate is 2 dungeons, 2 towns, but not every game has dungeons and towns. Not every game is that a good opening section, but that's the play it by ear. One of our first couple episodes is going to be Yakuza Kiwami, which has neither towns nor dungeons. So
it's all one big dungeon town.
Yeah. So it's a little. We'll play it by ear, but just the opening chunk, enough where you will have played the game, not necessarily made progress in the game, but you have done what the game is offering you to do. The idea behind it is so many times someone's like, oh, have you played Final Fantasy VII? And I'll be like, oh yeah, I played up till around Wall Market. I didn't really like it. And the person will be like, oh my God, you didn't get to the end of disc 1. You haven't even played the game yet. But I have, because I've played like 6 hours of the thing. So the games have merit even in the opening first little chunk, and I want to talk about that opening chunk because it's awesome and good. And so I might not ever get to the big plot twist, or in the case of Final Fantasy 13, I might not ever get to fully use the battle system, but I'll have the vibe of the game, and I can talk about it just surface level like that, but super focused at the same time. So instead of just like, yeah, I liked the game, the graphics were great, the battle system was fun, I can dive in and be like, oh, I really liked here in this first town, they teach you how the battle system is going to work by showing you the old man catching the Pokemon or whatever the particulars will be. Just like in the analogy I use when I pitch this podcast is Doctor Who has 230 old episodes and like 200 something new episodes, endless books, endless audio plays, all of those things. So do you have to consume all of it to be a Doctor Who fan? Or if you just caught The Girl in the Fireplace one night after you were headed to bed and you watched it and you liked it, you kind of get it. You kind of understand what Doctor Who is, even if you don't dive all the way in and watch all of it. So this podcast is going to be purposefully not completing all of these games and not trying to review them as a whole, but just talk about what the game is, who made it, why it's important, and how fun and cool and interesting the first couple of chunks are. Which brings me to our first game. We're going to dive straight in. It's weird not having an opening bit. All of our other podcasts have an opening bit, but our opening bits are longer than this podcast is supposed to be. So we'll just dive straight in, I guess. So our first episode is going to be about the original Final Fantasy. I wanted the first episode to be about Dragon Quest, but Maddie was my guest for Dragon Quest, and she's not ready for a couple of weeks, and I wanted to start this now. So instead, we're starting with Final Fantasy. So So Final Fantasy was originally conceived as fighting fantasy, and it was released for the Famicom back in 1987, and it was created by Hironobu Sakaguchi, with a scenario written by Kenji Terada, with character designs by Yoshitaka Amano, music by Nobuo Uematsu, and programming by Iranian-American Nasir Gabelli. So I guess that finally settles, do you have to be Japanese to make JRPGs? No, you have to be Iranian. That's it. That's the joke.
Good joke.
So Sakaguchi sensei, like Hori sensei before him, was a huge RPG and computer nerd, and he loved playing games like Ultima and Wizardry, and so he wanted to make his own RPG for the NES, but Square didn't think that there was a market for console RPGs, which is the funniest sentence to read from like 30 years in the future, because Square basically only makes RPGs on console these days, which just is great that at one time they were like, nah, not for us. We're not an RPG company. But then, of course, Dragon Quest then gets released, is a huge hit, so they decide to go forward with this project. But although this game couldn't exist without Dragon Quest, the inspirations, at least according to interviews and stuff like that, Final Fantasy is an adaptation of Ultima and Wizardry to consoles, and not as a response to Dragon Quest. Sakaguchi was like, I love Ultima, I love Wizardry, we need to do this on the NES, and they were like, no. And then Hori Sensei did it, and they were like, okay, go ahead. And so he continued it from there. So it does owe to Dragon Quest for existing, but is not a like Dragon Quest ripoff, which I thought was super interesting, because I always figured it was a ripoff because it came out later.
And playing the original version for the first time for this project, I was like, yeah, this is really doing its own interpretation of these basic ideas that have been around. It doesn't feel like a Dragon Quest clone. It feels like they're both adaptations of the same thing, but they're adapting it differently.
Yeah, like I've played a bunch of Dragon Quest ripoffs on the NES, and this is not one of them. It really doesn't do anything the same way that Dragon Quest does, besides just you move around and you get in random battles. So there's some apocrypha surrounding the name Final Fantasy that everybody has heard about, that Square was going to go bankrupt, so they released their Final Fantasy game. But Sakaguchi is like, that's not true. Uematsu started those rumors, which I think is great. But he said the working title was FF because it would use 2 Latin letters and only 4 kana to write it in Japanese. So they were like, that's super cool. We'll call it Fighting Fantasy. But then, because there was the tabletop RPG named Fighting Fantasy, Sakaguchi says it was a, quote, back to the wall type situation back then, and any other F word would have been fine. So they named it fucking Fantasy, and everything has been set in stone ever since. So
maybe it's just because I've grown up with the name Final Fantasy, but I just feel it's a really good sequence of words to title something like this. Like, I don't know, it's more iconic than Dragon Quest, and I love Dragon Quest, but that's not a very memorable title.
No, Dragon Quest sounds like the fake RPG that Drake and Josh would play on Nickelodeon. Final Fantasy 1 has been remade a bajillion times, and what's interesting, as you'll hear on the Dragon Quest episode, which will now be episode 2 instead of episode 1, every time Dragon Quest was remade after the MSX version, the math has not changed, not only in Dragon Quest 1, but in every Dragon Quest since then. It's like a very solid, unchanging series that like will add things on top of it, but the bones are all still there. Final Fantasy 1 is not the same way, not even close. So a quick rundown of all of the changes. There's like a 45-minute-ish deep dive video I found on YouTube by Austin something or other that goes in super in depth on all of the changes. So this is just a surface level. If you want a better comparison, look on YouTube. But when it was remade on the MSX2, they upgraded the sound, graphics, and tweaked some of the job classes. Then they remade it for the WonderSwan, where they tweaked the graphics even more, and these graphics stuck around basically until the Pixel Remaster. Buildings were given interiors. The text finally had the blue boxes. Cutscenes were added, and a new script was written.
Wait. So the original Famicom version didn't have blue text boxes?
I think it has blue NPC boxes. The fighting is the black ones we're familiar with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because the NES version definitely has blue text boxes. So I was like, whoa, was that something they added in the localization? But sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah. Also on the WonderSwan remake, they changed the targeting AI, which is one of the two worst parts of the NES version.
Gosh, the targeting AI is the worst thing about the NES version. It's not AI, just it doesn't retarget. If you're targeting an enemy and the enemy dies, then you don't target another enemy, which means you have to be very mindful. And usually I like it when a game makes you be mindful, but I don't like this.
No, it's frustrating. So, the WonderSwan remake is also when you finally had a boss and final boss theme. The NES version, if you play through it the whole game, you get the same exact battle theme for every single battle, which is weird. And then finally, the items and spells were tweaked. This is the biggest overhaul, and it basically every version after this is based on the WonderSwan version. So the PlayStation remake upgraded the graphics a little more. Specifically, the battle backgrounds are now PlayStation 32-bit graphics. Most everything else is from the WonderSwan version. I
think the Origins version on PlayStation is absolutely beautiful.
It really is.
It's amazing. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go on.
No. It also has orchestrated music, more save slots, a bestiary, FMVs, and an easy mode. Then on the GBA remake, spells now use MP. More on this later. The item system is completely redone. Classes are completely rebalanced. The difficulty is reduced, and there's even more targeting AI tweaks and some new optional dungeons. Then they made a flip phone version, which basically removed everything, including sound effects. All they improved was you can turn dashing always on, because you couldn't hold two buttons at a time on a flip phone. And then they added a quick save feature. And then the previously definitive edition of Final Fantasy I was the PSP remake, where the graphics were overhauled. Like, they took the WonderSwan sprites, made them bigger, but didn't change the art style. It's like hard to explain without just seeing it, but it looks like they just added more pixels to the classic. It's such a good look compared to like the Final Fantasy V and VI remakes, which were not nearly as good. But all of the changes from the GBA and PlayStation remakes are back. Then they added even more content, like some post-game bosses. It was in the highest resolution so far. Very awesome graphics. Like, if you aren't playing the Pixel remaster, go back and play the PSP version. It's really good. Then there was a 3DS version, which was the PSP version, but they made the buildings and type stuff in towns and dungeons 3D. Otherwise, it's like sprites on 3D backgrounds, and it's exactly the PSP version. And then you had the smartphone version, which was the PSP version, but with bugs. And then now, of course, we have the Pixel Remaster, which is super cool. The whole Pixel Remaster project, if you haven't looked into what it is besides just, it's another remake, this is not a pixelized version of the PSP version. It is a separate or a second attempt at modernizing the original NES version, and that goes for all of the ones. So all of the changes and adaptations and stuff that they've done for all of the remakes since are nixed, and it goes back to the original. It's like, how do we make this original thing fit in the future? So the Pixel Remaster has Vancian magic. It doesn't have any of the post game. It doesn't have MP. It does have the balance tweaks of the GBA version without having to go to MP, and it did add Phoenix Downs as an item, but in general, it's like they took the NES version, added some modern stuff onto it, and it's super good. I played to my refresher for today's episode, I played through the Pixel Remaster, and I'm probably going to actually finish it because it was really nice.
I haven't played the Pixel Remaster, but my beef with it is that you can walk diagonally, and it's perverse. It looks so gross.
Yeah, this first game is grid-based movement. It is not pixel-based movement. So moving diagonally, you move an entire grid diagonally with one step, and it's like the Warrior of Light just is from the Ministry of Silly Walks. If he walks diagonally, it's like everything is normal, up, down, left, right, and then you go diagonally and he like lunges for it. It looks ugly. I hate it. It's really bad. But
and you might say you don't have to walk diagonally. Well, I might do it accidentally.
Yeah,
and I don't want to see that. It's
a bad idea. Play with a keyboard or a D-pad to limit your potential for doing that. So yeah, let's listen to some track from Final Fantasy, and then we'll get in and start talking about our opening slice. So when you first load up the game, you're greeted with the opening crawl, Star Wars style, which sets the scene for you. This is already like way more story than Dragon Quest had. Final Fantasy definitely set themselves up as the story ones. As if we were to continue and beat this game, there's like time travel and time loops and all this story type stuff that Dragon Quest had no interest in whatsoever.
Dragon Quest had sort of started doing more story with Dragon Quest 2, which I believe had come out at the beginning of 1987, whereas this came out at the end of 1987. But still, Final Fantasy was being more dramatic with this opening thing, and
Yeah, it's super cool. So the opening text is basically just some flowery speak that says the world's fucked and we need some heroes to go and save it. So when you start a new game, you're allowed to roll your characters by selecting their job and their name. I chose, as always, a fighter, a red mage, and a white mage, and a black mage. And what did you pick, Bernard?
So I went with a fighter, a thief, a white mage, and a black mage. A very balanced party. I believe, I didn't actually look this up, but I believe in Final Fantasy 1, the thing with a thief is that a thief can always successfully run from battles, or at least has a higher likelihood of succeeding at running from battles. So I think that's pretty useful. And I think this is incredibly cool because this was before Dragon Quest 3.
Yeah.
So I don't know. In my brain, I always sort of thought of Dragon Quest invented jobs and then Final Fantasy borrowed the idea. But no, Final Fantasy did it first.
Yeah. I think I think Final Fantasy 1, then Dragon Quest 3, then Final Fantasy 3 is building off of each other to go into that order. But because I think Dragon Quest 3 does a lot more with jobs than Final Fantasy does. Final Fantasy, it's almost just choose your character more than actually a job system.
Absolutely. And then Final Fantasy 3 does a lot more still. So, yeah, it's interesting seeing these two competing series build off each other like that.
Yeah. So after you roll your characters, you spawn on the overworld and you're unleashed. You can go anywhere, but it starts you like one square away from walking into a town. So you probably are going to go straight in there.
And hopefully you do, because you don't have any weapons or armor or magic yet.
Yeah, my first time playing it, chose poorly. I managed to get into a fight without realizing that I had literally nothing on me. I figured, like, in Dragon Quest, you start with shitty equipment. Surely I'll have some shitty equipment, and you do not. You have jack shit. The Pixel Remaster starts everybody with a knife and clothes, so you're not exactly on nothing. But and on the NES, you have absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm. How did they get to Corneria?
Yeah, who knows? There's the bridge is out, so you can't leave. You couldn't have come in from the north. You don't have a boat. You don't have any items. Like, how did you actually get there?
I'm sure this is answered in Stranger of Paradise.
It probably is. So your mages also don't even start with a spell. You have to purchase all of your spells in this game. So if you are like me and you see that you get into your first battle and you nearly get killed because you have nothing, so you escape and you go and you buy weapons and armor for everyone, you then have no money. And I had 3 mages in my party, so that really sucked, and I had to grind to even start doing anything. But
so on the NES version, I found that the starting money was like just enough to get me going with only 2 mages.
Yeah.
And I think the amount of money they give you at the start is sort of balanced for that, because like weapons are very cheap. Yeah. Armor's really expensive. Magic is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. So my first time through, I had to grind before we get started, but that's actually how I found out one of the reasons that I like Final Fantasy. Like, it clicked with me by fucking up. So Final Fantasy has big numbers where Dragon Quest has little numbers. And so because the numbers are so big, the first group of monsters you fight and the second group of monsters you fight are huge, but because you have higher HP and all of those things, they hit really hard and are really scary, but you'll probably survive. So in Dragon Quest, if you walk the wrong direction and you go over a bridge that you're not supposed to yet, you'll just get destroyed, because a critical hit doing 1.5 times damage on 20 HP is a lot. So if you're not ready for it, you'll get destroyed. But here, because all the numbers are bigger, you'll likely survive. So you can, instead of just hanging out around Cornelia and grinding off of the little Dorcases, you can go and get the Dorcas generals right off, like in the next patch of trees is the next area, and they're harder, but you can probably survive, and they give so much more experience. So where Dragon Quest is like always push forward and grind as you're going through, because you gain experience and you'll get better and better. Final Fantasy is like, if you stay put, you're not going to get any better, so you have to push forward so that you can get better, which I thought was a really cool difference between the two, that if I had properly kitted myself out like I did on my replay today, I didn't even hardly notice the difference. But before you can do any of you do all the battling, though, you have to get your gear, ideally. So you go into town and you start to speak to the NPCs there. The NES version feels super bizarre because the text boxes are not like text boxes that you see in video games where the box shows up and then the text fills in. It's like the box and the text are a single sprite that's revealed with a super annoying sound effect all at once. And
I kind of like the sound effect. And it like goes the whole thing like scrolls to appear. It's great.
Yeah. It was not what I was expecting when I went and talked to my first NPC. The towns are pretty big, and they have a lot more NPCs, but most of the NPCs that look the same will say the same thing in each town. So most of the people here in this first town will just bemoan the loss of their princess or talk about how Garland is super evil. And when you make it into the castle, in the NES version, the king just has a single text box, and his advisors say the same thing. The NES version is pre-cutscene, so everybody just says one thing. In a second, I'll come back to this because they do something cool with this. But for now, we get our gear, and we know that Garland's castle is off to the west, and that there's a princess waiting on us inside. So we start to make our way westward, pausing to heal up or buy spells and items, whatever we need to. We grind our way until we eventually make it to Garland's castle. The dungeon is dressed up to be a real space, not just a random maze like Dragon Quest and Wizardry, etc. I keep referencing Dragon Quest as if I've already done the Dragon Quest episode. I'm sorry. I meant to, but you'll tune in next week and you'll understand all of these references. But I'm coming into that first dungeon and seeing that it's set up to like it's a real castle, I thought was really cool because these most early RPGs are just like, oh yeah, this is his castle. It's shaped like blah, 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 blah.
Yes, and I like how you enter. You can go straight to Garland and fight him, but you can also go around and explore. And if you explore, you find a piece of armor that you can give someone, and you find a potion, and you even find a tent. And I'm using modern Final Fantasy terms, even though I was playing the NES version. So those can help you in your fight against Garland. You're rewarded for exploring.
Yeah, and the monsters here hit really, really hard. But again, you can probably survive them. So it's this is a dangerous place. Let me grind my way through here and then go fight Garland after I start kicking these creeps' butt.
And we've used the word grind a lot. Like, you really only need to be like level 3 or 4 to beat Garland.
Yeah, it's not like grinding the way that we think of it modernly, like a post-Disgaea grind doesn't actually exist. Back in the day, like, grinding just means the gameplay was get into some random battles that will level you up to continue. It is not a like hours of this boss has an arbitrarily high HP, so I'm going to grind for 3 or 4 hours. It's just make your way through it and get properly kitted out before you can go in. I feel we should speak about the battle system for a bit. So, Final Fantasy I doesn't have the series staple of active time battle yet. That comes around in Final Fantasy IV. So, you have turns, and you set your tactics that you're going to pick at the beginning of your turn, and then they play out in order based on your character's speed. The original NES Final Fantasy battle screen looks like wizardry. It does not look like Final Fantasy. So if you haven't actually ever played it, go back and play it, look at it, whatever. It's very strikingly different than what we're used to from Final Fantasy games. The battle system also has a focus on the elemental properties of spells in the game. And so you, like, the creeps and zombies that you face here are weak to fire. So if you gave your black mage a fire spell, you're going to be doing better than if you had given them the lightning spell instead, which is super cool because Dragon Quest, what we saw before it, did not have any elemental properties to it yet. The original localization called the fire spell Hurt, and the bigger fire spell Hurt More, because it didn't matter what attack you were doing, you were just hurting the bad guy. So I really liked at this point, when you get in with all these creeps and all these zombies and they're weak to fire, this whole time while you're leveling up, you don't get a whole lot of spell slots. So spell slots are kind of like how they are in D&D, where you get a certain number of spell slots for the particular spell level. Unlike in D&D, you can't spend a level 2 slot on a level 1 spell. So because we only have access to level 1 spells, the first couple of levels give you, I think by the time I killed Garland, I only could cast 3 spells. But getting to that point, I basically had no spells I could do, and my black mages were just getting their asses kicked. So once you got here, because of the elemental weaknesses or whatever, they went from being, we must protect these babbies at all costs, to they're wiping the floor with everything that Garland can throw at us, which is super cool. It makes the jobs feel like they all have a purpose, instead of just being like, oh, the white mage is only going to heal the hero and the hero's going to be doing all of the main stuff. It's everybody has their chance to shine.
Interestingly, the white mage, if you give them a hammer, which you can get in Cornelia, actually can do a decent bit of damage. And also, you can buy them a spell that hurts undead,
of which we have a lot over here.
Yes.
So everybody is doing something. So you walked in and you fight Garland. He monologues at you. You defeat him. You save the princess, and she warps you back to the castle. But now that you're back at the castle, if you talk to the NPCs again, they all have different dialogues, and they're all like thanking you for the saving the princess. So while there are less unique NPCs, the world changes more as you go through it, which I think is super cool. So I'll put up with the weird text boxes and the sound effects if the world feels a little more alive. One thing I think is pretty cool is from the opening crawl text and everybody here, I figured my whole quest for the game was going to be go and fight Garland and save the princess, and then you do that right away and you bring the princess back, and then there's still the whole rest of the game left. And this game has a lot more of small episodic storylines, and so each town area has a problem. When you go there, you solve the problem however you do it. In this case, we went and did a dungeon, fought a boss, came back. In a second, we just fight some goons and a boss. But each little area has its own like Dragon Quest victory lap, where the NPCs update their dialogue and tell you how cool you are, but in like episodic format instead of a long form, which I thought was super cool.
And to continue just talking about Dragon Quest all the time, I find that interesting because that format is something I associate much more with Dragon Quest. And it's not really a thing in Dragon Quest 1, but in later Dragon Quest games, it's very much you go to a town, there's a little self-contained story there, and you do the little story, and then you move on to the next town. Whereas later Final Fantasy games, it really feels like you're going to each town to move forward the main plot.
And so we could stop here because it's a literal vertical slice. It was back in the day they offered demos for this game, and building the bridge to the mainland was the end of the demo. The title screen for the game pops up here, and in the demo it said "Thank you for playing" and ended. So it's literally the vertical slice of the game, but I wanted to do a little bit more to see what the rest of it is. And I should bring up the title screen that pops up is fucking great. It's some of the best graphics on the NES aesthetically.
It's so beautiful. Most of the game is nothing special graphically. It looks good, but it just sort of looks like an NES game. It doesn't like jump out at you like Kirby's Adventure is just an NES game, but it jumps out at you and you're like, whoa, these graphics are amazing. Final Fantasy 1, you're like, eh. But the title screen is beautiful. It shows the 4 heroes of light standing on a hill looking back at Cornelia, and you just very vaguely in silhouette you see them, so they can be any class. And then text boxes pop up that take a lot of words to say their journey has begun, and then give you some opening credits. Not crediting Hironobu Sakaguchi, but crediting the other people you mentioned.
Interesting. I didn't catch that. So as you walk around the world map, you have a pretty huge explorable area right away, which is pretty cool. But there's really only one place you can go to. But I thought once I got out here, I'm like, oh my god, I can go anywhere. I'm king of the universe. But there's really only one town you can eventually get to.
I really like this part because you don't know where to go, and you might go north, and the monsters are really strong. So you'll be going north, and you're like, if I go a little farther north, maybe there will be a town, but I'm out of magic. Should I turn around and go back to Cornelia? It's a nice friction. Yeah.
And if eventually you do make your way westward and find a town called Pravoka. Eastward. That is definitely east.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely east. I wrote westward about 3 times in my notes, but it is definitely to the east. So you make your way to the second town, which in the NES version is where I decided I would never play the NES version again. You go up to the weapon shop, which, as you recall, we said weapons are cheap, armor is expensive, spells are in the middle. The second sword upgrade is 550 coins, where the first one was 8 coins. Things are really fucking expensive in the NES version, and the GBA version onward lowers these prices. You don't have artificial grinding spots. Like if we tried to go on from here and get to the next spot and we needed to gear up, it would have a whole lot of grinding to do. But so the second town's episode, as you talk to all the NPCs, is about pirates that have taken over the town. And my first time doing it, I accidentally stumbled into the boss fight because I was looking for the item shop. But I managed to win and save the day.
You accidentally stumbled into the fight. People were talking about there's pirates, and you went up and talked to the guy who looks like a pirate, even in NES graphics.
Yeah, I never said, hi, I'm a smart person. And I'm a smart person that's going to be telling you about RPGs. I'm an idiot who happens to like RPGs. That's what's going on.
Just walking up to a dude with an eye patch and a peg leg. Do you run the item shop?
Anywho, so you beat the pirates, and they promise to be good, and to prove it, they give up piracy and give you their pirate ship. So right out of the gate, 2 hours into playing the game, you get the boat, which feels super huge in retrospect. Like normally you play disc 1, then you get the boat. The disc 2, you get the like hovercraft, and then disc 3 you finally get the airship or whatever, and here you get the boat really cool, really early, which is really cool. After I got the ship, I wandered around for a little bit, and I saw that the world map is huge and empty, and really just a way to ferry you from episode to episode of the plot, rather than being like in Dragon Quest 1, the world map is kind of the first dungeon, and you go into small sub dungeons of it, but like navigating the world map itself is like the gameplay loop. And here in Final Fantasy 1, that's not really the case. It is, you use it to grind, but you're mostly traveling on it. Which is pretty cool.
That's a good point. The world map of Dragon Quest 1 does feel like the dungeon of the game. Mm-hmm. It definitely feels in sort of a Zelda 1 type way.
Yeah. So this is where I will where we stopped. So we'll listen to some other snippet of a track, and then we'll talk about our final thoughts on the game as a whole. Some takeaways I took from Final Fantasy 1 is gearing up your characters and being like gear more than levels is super important in this game, even more so than in Dragon Quest. Again, talking about episode 2 before we recorded it, but finding your way to grind and get the money to get the stuff pulls you into dangerous areas, instead of like just tackling the next, like your sphere of influence. Instead of just making it bigger and bigger, you like purposefully go to things you're not ready yet to just get lucky and get better, which is super cool. The sub stories of each town because graphically all the towns basically end up looking the same, but like Cornelia is the castle town, and Pravoka is the pirate city, and because of the stories involved in it, it makes each place feel more real and more like memorable, which is I really like. So a couple things that I really liked about the game is like I really like the, like I've talked about it several times, but the different flavor of grinding that this game has compared to Dragon Quest and other RPGs that I've played, where the things are risky but doable. So you reach out and it pulls you forward instead of you tiptoeing forward to see how much ground you can get. And I just thought that was a really cool way to do it, because I've played a lot of Dragon Quests and formed my thesis on grinding based off of that. And so something that's completely different, I thought was super cool. I also liked when I figured out that the creeps were weak to fire, and it felt like I, the player, unlocked the skills of as if I were playing a action game or a platformer, like where you have to do the right things at the right time. I felt like I had mastered this game to be like, oh, they're weak to fire. I have fire on both of my mages. I'm going to kick ass and take names. And I thought that felt really, really cool.
Funny enough, I'm guessing you wouldn't have had that moment if you'd played the game back in the day, because I know the NES version came with like a huge manual guide thing and like a monster chart and stuff. So it probably said use fire on the creeps somewhere in there. And you probably read the whole thing on the way back from Walmart.
Yeah.
So I want to share an anecdote about this game, which it really, it shows an interesting bit of personality in this game. So I originally played Final Fantasy I on the Game Boy Advance, the Dawn of Souls version, way back when the Game Boy Advance version first came out. And there's a line that stuck with me all this time, and it's in Cornelia. There's a well off to the left side of town. Mm-hmm. And if you investigate it, in the Dawn of Souls version, it says, it's a well. It looks like you could climb inside, but you can't, really. I thought that was hilarious.
It's very hilarious.
And I didn't know anything about Dragon Quest at the time, so the idea of it being a Dragon Quest reference didn't occur to me until I shared that with Maddie Grace Webben, who was already a Dragon Quest fan at this time. And she was like, oh, that's a Dragon Quest reference. But, dear listener, I was playing the NES version for the first time for this project. And I went and looked at that well, and it said, this is a well. You might think that there is something to it, but in fact, it is just an ordinary well. And I was like, wait, what? Because
you can't go down wells in 1 or 2.
Yeah. And then I was like, but wait, the North American version of Final Fantasy came out in 1990 after Dragon Quest IV, and I'm pretty sure Dragon Quest IV is the first one where you can go down wells.
3. You can, 3? You can. Because I haven't played 4, so I know it's not 4.
Okay, well, point is you can't do it in 1 or 2, which were the only ones that were released when Final Fantasy I came out in Japan. Mm-hmm. So I found the Japanese version of Final Fantasy I named everyone and I went into town, looked at that well. I typed in the nightmare pixel hiragana on Google Translate. The translation Google Translate gave me was, it's a well. It's a well that seems to have nothing. So that little bit of personality was in the game since 1987, before Dragon Quest put wells in games. So it's not a Dragon Quest reference. Maybe it's a reference to something else. But
interesting.
I just thought that was an interesting anecdote.
Yeah, I always thought that was a Dragon Quest reference.
And I actually ended up playing the entire slice we talked about today in the Dawn of Souls version as well, because that version has beautiful graphics and actually beautiful music. Some of the tracks are really good, even though it's on the Game Boy Advance sound chip, which is not great. Yeah. But like the Cornelia town theme is great.
Speaking of other versions and good music, the Pixel Remaster music is amazing. But like I mentioned before, it is a pixel remaster of the NES version. So Garland's, like, the boss theme is a, like, different orchestration of the random battle theme, because the original version didn't have different themes. So it still has the ba-dun-dun-dun, like, motif, but is more different, which I haven't played any of the versions that added boss themes, so I don't know if it was the same way prior, but I thought that was super cool that it still was the same track. It just was like the epic version versus the random battle version.
Mm-hmm.
Final Fantasy 1 has a bunch of interesting quirks that don't really make it into the next set of games, so I think they're interesting to look at. And one of my favorite ones is that the NES was never designed to have battery saves. So when the NES powered down, the electronics did not isolate the memory on the cart from the power supply like it did when you powered it up. So the little bitty power surges could arbitrarily change the save RAM's data if you just turned it off. So most games with a save feature, they either have a special chip on their carts that can talk to the machine and make it protected, or how Final Fantasy does it is when you save to the end, the innkeeper turns to camera and says, make sure you hold down the power button when you turn it off so that you don't accidentally fuck up your game. And I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, that was funny. I really like this game, and I think I want to keep on playing the NES version just for fun, because it's an interesting look back into the past of JRPGs, and it's a good bedtime game. Mm-hmm. I will say one interesting thing I found out when I was looking up stuff about this is, Phantasy Star for the Master System came out 2 days later.
What a weekend.
Yep. And honestly, I think that kind of makes Final Fantasy look a little bad, because Phantasy Star is way better and feels way more advanced. Yeah. I still really like Final Fantasy 1 on the NES, but Phantasy Star is cooler.
Yeah.
And you should definitely do an episode on it.
I will. So
eventually.
I also really liked Final Fantasy 1 a lot more than I thought. When I played it for the blog, I liked it a lot, and I was like, I'm going to replay this on the PSP. But having played the Pixel Remaster earlier today, the Pixel Remaster is really good. I don't know which one would be a definitive version. If you don't like spell slots, play the PSP. If you do like spell slots, play the Pixel Remaster. If you like old weirdness, play the NES. But
yeah, I'm personally a big fan of the Fantasy and Magic in Final Fantasy 1. I don't think every game should have Fantasy and Magic, but I think it adds a little bit of personality to Final Fantasy 1's systems.
Because if it's just MP, it's just a worse Dragon Quest 3.
Yeah,
but with Fantasy Magic, it's different, and that's why I really like the Pixel Remaster. Is it has a lot of the more modern stuff, like randomly, because as you may or may not know, Chocobos and Moogles, the two mascots of Final Fantasy, were added in Final Fantasy 3 and not in Final Fantasy 1. So the Pixel Remaster changes some of the statues in Cornelia Castle to have Chocobos on them, just to make it more of a Final Fantasy game, which is silly. But there's other like modern trappings without changing the underlying gameplay. So I highly recommend the Pixel Remaster. And when you do it, download a font don't play with the default font. That's the biggest.
It is so easy to change the font. Just Google Pixel Remaster font, and they'll tell you a good font, and you can download it, and you literally just drag it into a folder.
It is ridiculous. One of the easiest mods out there. If you find there's a mod that replaces it with the Game Boy Advance and DS Final Fantasy font, which is a very good, very Final Fantasy looking font. It's the one that I play it with. It makes it feel like Final Fantasy to me.
I feel like the default font, I feel like it has no redeeming qualities because I feel like it has very low readability.
Yeah, it's so squished.
Yeah. If it were, sometimes there's a font and you don't like it, but it's it's actually very readable. Mm-hmm. But I don't see anything good about the font they chose.
No, it's real bad, but real easy to fix. So if you're listening to this in the super future where Pixel Remaster has been added to consoles and they haven't fixed that font, this is me only talking about the PC version because that font is real bad. And I don't think I would play it on Switch if they didn't patch out that font. But if you liked what you heard today and you want me to talk about your favorite RPG, JRPG Canon episodes are community sponsored. So if you head on over to our Ko-Fi at www.rpgbook.club and click on commissions, you can sponsor a JRPG Canon episode. I have a lot in the hole that I'm working through, but give me more homework and you can be like, oh my gosh, you have to talk about Charles Barkley's Shut Up and Jam Gaiden. Just go and commission it, and then I'll play the first little bit and I'll talk about it. But if you somehow happened upon this podcast because you were searching for Final Fantasy 1 and you didn't notice that we have 3 other podcasts that you listen to. Our normal podcasts are a huge focus on the story and not necessarily the game design like we were talking about today. So you can check out our main series. If you like Final Fantasy, we've covered Final Fantasy X back in the day, and we really liked it.
And we're currently covering the Final Fantasy 13 trilogy on our Longcast episodes.
We are. So plenty of stuff for you to like. The next one after this will be Dragon Quest. I will make Maddie find time to do it so we can get that going. But you
kind of can't do this project without starting with Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. And in fact, starting with Final Fantasy instead of Dragon Quest was sort of a stretch.
Yeah, it was a little hard. So definitely will not move any farther without covering Dragon Quest. So keep an eye out on this podcast feed for when the next one drops. And until next time, I'm Sam Allman.
I'm David Bernard Houck.
I'll see you soon. Bye.